Good morning, Year 13. This is our first lesson of the week. This week we're going to have 3 lessons, all of which will be focused around revising Top Girls, looking back at some important moments in the plot, some important text by Churchill, and looking at the overall big ideas of the play. On Friday, I'm going to invite you to a live Teams meeting. That will just be a whole class feedback session where I'll talk about things that you've done well, I'll give you some feedback on your essays and talk about how we can move forward in our learning. Overall though, I've been really pleased with the quality of work that I've received, particularly the longer responses that some of you have submitted. So in this lesson, we're going to focus on the beginning part of Act 2. So before we do anything, what I would like you to do is pause the video here, and I'd like you to read the first half of Act 2 up to the end of the second interview. Okay, I'd like you to read it and to draw out some important moments, some important quotations that you think will be useful in future essays. Okay, so once you've done that, we're ready to move forward and look at the beginning part of Act 2. I've split Act 2 into 2 different lessons because I think there's a lot for us to look at in Act 2. So, an overview of Act 2 then. So, Churchill uses a non-chronological structure in the play overall. And so it's important for us to think in terms of time about when Act 2 occurs. So the actual acts, if they were put into chronological order rather than the non-chronological structure that Churchill uses, would be as follows: 3, 1 and 2. So although this comes in the middle of the play, what we're seeing in chronological order happens after everything else. The act opens in Joyce's back garden with Kit and Angie, and then it shifts to the office of Top Girls Employment Agency. There we see 3 interviews with potential job candidates, and then Mrs. Kidd enters and argues with Marlene. And during this act, Angie also visits Marlene at the office. So that's a very brief overview of what happened in this particular act. So we're going to start at the beginning of Act 2 and we're going to look at the scene with Angie, Kit and Joyce. So Angie and Kit are in the garden, Joyce is in the house and she tries to call Angie in. Just to ensure that we've got a secure knowledge of who these characters are, Angie is Joyce's daughter. She's introduced as being not very bright and she doesn't seem to have that many friends, apart from Kit. Kit is Angie's friend. She's younger than Kit, but seems to be more intelligent. And Joyce is Angie's mother. So, Angie and Kit begin in a shelter at the bottom of the garden, the shelter providing the symbolic function of somewhere that's safe and a safe space for them to talk freely. As they begin to talk, there's definitely a power struggle between Angie and Kit. So Angie is older, and I don't know if you remember, like from being very young, being older would always mean that you were in charge. I was definitely always in charge of my little brother when we were children and we would play games. I was the bossy one and would boss him around. So Angie's older, so that gives her some power over Kit. But Kit's much more intelligent than Angie, which means that there's a bit of a struggle for power between them. Angie repeatedly tries to shock and scare Kit, but she fails to do so because of Kit's intelligence. So Churchill seems to suggest that the rise of the new woman creates conflict between women as they compete with one another. So Angie probably would, well, it's referred to several times in the play that she won't make it, that her best hope is to get married and to be some sort of version of the old woman, if you like. Whereas Kit has ambition, she's intelligent, and so she seems to represent the next generation of the new woman. But because of Kit's ambition and intelligence, that tips the balance between them and starts to cause this struggle and conflict. And so the 2 girls, whilst they're friends, don't actually exist in harmony. There's that power struggle. So as you read again, I want you to be looking for evidence of that power struggle. Churchill seems to establish that some women have what it takes. So Kit is that person who's driven, ambitious and intelligent, and she seems to have what it takes. Her trajectory is into the working world to be this new woman, whereas Angie will seemingly be left behind. She doesn't have what it takes, and that's repeated after we're introduced to the character. In this scene, as well as seeing the conflict between the two girls, we also see a lot of resentment between Joyce and Angie, which we later learn is a result of Joyce's feelings of entrapment linked to motherhood. And this is particularly evident when Joyce very quickly moves from "Angie, come inside" to calling her an effing rotten little C-bomb. Can't say the words on YouTube, it doesn't feel right. And so we see quickly that Joyce is very quick to anger with Angie, and therefore shows Joyce's feelings of resentment, which, as I said before, in Act 3 we learn is due to her feelings of entrapment linked to motherhood. She feels like she could possibly have gone places, she could have done something different, she might have achieved similar success to Marlene had she not been trapped by motherhood. But the resentment works both ways. Angie also resents Joyce. And we know this because when she's talking to Kit, she says, "I'm going to kill my mother." Okay. So the scene then moves on to quickly demonstrate to us the changing opportunities for women of the next generation. So Joyce and Marlene's generation seem to be presented with two clear choices. And Churchill shows that this situation is perpetuated and reflected in the younger generation as well. So whilst Joyce's job opportunities were limited by motherhood, Kit and Angie at this point in time, where they don't have children and they're young and they're studying at school, are seemingly free to make different choices and create their own paths. But I just wanted to draw out a bit of the text and read a part of the text to you so we can see what their trajectory seems to be. So Joyce says, "It wouldn't make no difference to Angie. She's not going to get a job when jobs are hard to get. I'd be sorry for anyone in charge of her. She'd better get married. I don't know anyone who'd have her mind. She's one of those girls, might never leave home. What do you want to be when you grow up, Kit?" "Physicist." "What?" "Nuclear physicist." "Whatever for?" So this section of the text is particularly interesting because it demonstrates to us Joyce's lack of ability to understand any woman that wants to do anything that would seemingly have been seen as a masculine role before. So she can't understand Kit's ambition, and particularly Kit's ambition to go into nuclear science, which would have been a sphere dominated by males. And she says, "Whatever for?" It also reflects Joyce's attitude towards opportunities for women. So we know from reading the play as a whole that Joyce is from a working class background. We know that she adopts a domestic sphere, that she chose motherhood over a career. And she thinks that the only opportunity available for Angie is to make a similar choice. Reflected through the line, "She'd better get married," which demonstrates that Joyce still feels that women have to make a choice. They can't be successful career women and have children, but equally they can't choose that domestic life and maintain a career. And she has low aspirations for her daughter. She thinks that her daughter's best chance in life is to get married, to attach herself to a man who will support her financially. And this shows a generational difference, that Kit has those aspirations, being of the younger generation. She has those ambitions and choices, and Joyce fails to understand them as part of the older generation. So Kit's role within the play is to reflect the next generation of the new woman whose ambitions aren't limited by social norms and social expectations. And her attitudes directly contrast with Joyce's. Angie reflects something different about the younger generation who could be seemingly limited by feminism, because Angie doesn't have that drive, that ambition, or even sadly the intelligence to pursue any sort of career that's going to take her to being a top girl. And so through these two characters and through this scene, we see the next generation moving through and how they're affected and impacted by this new wave of feminism and the rise of the new woman. Then the scene moves forward and we see Win and Nell discussing their weekend in the Top Girls employment office. Now remember that this is a play just as much about class as it is about feminism. Churchill was a socialist, she hated these capitalist ideals, and she explores that through her play and through the characters in her play. So a lot of the characters that we're introduced to, for example Joyce and Angie and Marlene herself, have come from working class backgrounds. But Win and Nell have abbreviated names that leave their class status somewhat ambiguous and difficult for us to guess at. If we were to guess at what their longer names were, we would probably assume that they're called Winifred and Eleanor, which positions us to infer that they're probably not from working class backgrounds like the girls from the interviews and the other characters in the play, which Churchill would suggest has already given them better opportunities than a lot of women in the play and elevated their status within the play as well. But I want you to think, as you read the scene between Win and Nell, whether we're supposed to like the characters or not. So I'd like you now to go back into the text and I'd like you to answer the following question. Do you think Churchill wanted us to like Win and Nell? I'd like you to support your answer with evidence from the text. And then I'd like you to think about what Win and Nell represent. So if Joyce and Angie represent the working class, if Angie and Kit represent the next generation of women and how they'll be impacted and affected by changes to the social structure, what do you think Win and Nell represent? What's their plot function? Why are they there? Okay, pause the video, look through the text to find information to support your answer. Off you go. Okay, wonderful. Let's have a little look then. So hopefully you have a copy of the text at home. If you don't, I've drawn out some quotations that you could use. You could also use websites like GradeSaver or SparkNotes, which draw out important quotations as well. So these quotations, this doesn't reflect like a section of the text. These are just quotations I've pulled out that I think would be interesting. Just to contextualize these quotations as well, this is where Win and Nell are discussing their weekend, and they are talking about encounters they've had with men over the weekend. Nell tells about an affair she's had. So Nell says, "I've never been a staying put lady." What do you think that reflects about the new woman? So Nell says this in relation to her affair with a married man. She says she's never been a staying put lady. What does that suggest about the new woman? Pause and have a think. Okay, so I would write down the quotation, and then next to it I'd like you to write down what it reflects. For me, I think it reflects that the new woman can't develop meaningful relationships because they're constantly striving and looking for more, and any kind of relationship would hold them back from their career, which is what they place as being most important in their lives. Nell says, when she's discussing about the people that they're going to interview that day, she says, "I've got that poor little nerd, I should never have said I could help." So Nell seems to position herself as being more important and more powerful than the women that she tries to help. But I think we also get a sense that she doesn't really want to help them. I think there's a sense in the play that either the characters have what it takes to be this new woman and to go far and achieve their dreams and ambitions, or they don't. And I think Nell is talking about this particular person she says she's going to help as if she doesn't have what it takes and she can't really help her. When she calls her a poor little nerd as well, that noun phrase immediately is quite belittling and shows how the top girls in society look at women who aren't as successful as them, again showing that conflict between women. So write that quotation down and then write down what it demonstrates. Okay, Wynne says, tough bird like us. That has the tough bird bit carries connotations of being unbreakable, a lack of emotion. Again, reflecting that idea that the new woman has to be quite hardy in her emotions, quite unfeeling, if you like. Now then, when she's talking about her relationship again, said, I told her I'm not going to play house. I could go on working and not marry him. Again, reflecting this idea that the new woman rejects relationships, seeing them as only a distraction away from a career and what they feel is important in life. This idea of playing house as well. Play house means to adopt a role, to assume a role and to act it out. And she feels that the role of the wife, the domestic role, would be an act that she would have to adopt and wouldn't be her true and natural self. Nell also says, if you've got any really pretty bastards, Marlene, I want some for Prestel. Again, reflecting this idea that women have what it takes or they don't. And another thing for women that's constantly been an issue is the idea of attractiveness. So being attractive would naturally give women more like elevation in society, it would seem, is what Churchill is trying to present there. There was also reference to this in the earlier scene with Joyce, when Joyce said, if your face don't fit, suggesting that women who are attractive have an easier time of becoming successful. So Wynne and Nell then seem to represent the new woman, this woman who has left the domestic sphere, entered the world of work. And as part of that, what they reflect is this idea that the woman can't choose to have both a successful career and also fulfill those domestic roles. And these women have certainly chosen the career path. So again, if you need to reflect back and think, do you like Wynne and Nell? Personally, I don't think we're supposed to like Wynne and Nell, particularly because of their attitudes towards relationships and how Nell doesn't seem to feel any sense of guilt at sleeping with someone's husband, and just thinks it's funny. She talks down about the wife, thinking that she is more powerful and that she's made a better choice in life than her. So they also reflect this sense of conflict between the new woman and the woman who adopts the more traditional roles of older societies. Okay, and then we're introduced to our three interview candidates. So the first interview candidate is Janine. She is recently engaged, and Marlene thinks that there is little point in giving her a serious job because she'll have a baby soon. So the fact that Janine has already chosen to enter into a relationship, and a serious relationship, Marlene thinks that has set her trajectory for life, and that Janine will naturally want to now have a baby, and that will change her path away from a career. So Marlene doesn't think it's worth giving Janine any real time, but she does give her some advice, and she advises her not to wear a ring or to tell prospective employers that she is engaged. And this shows one of the difficulties for women in the workplace that was particularly prominent in the 80s. There was starting to be legislation that would prevent this from happening, and luckily in today's society there's absolutely legislation in place that means an employer cannot not give you a job, there we go. If they think that you might have a baby, if you've been engaged, that wouldn't be a reason to not give someone a job. and that's protected by law now. But in the 80s, that wasn't necessarily covered by this new legislation. And so Marlene thinks that one of the things that will hold Janine back is that employers will make that assumption that she's going to have a baby and won't favour her for employment because that will be an inconvenience to them. So Marlene suggests then that she takes on quite a female role, working in lampshades and upholstery and things like that, not the serious kind of career that Janine wanted to go for. So what does this particular part of the text reveal about setbacks for women in the workplace? Just pause the video here and write down your thoughts on that. Okay. Louise then, she is our next interview candidate, and she's worked for a company for years and years but never got anywhere because despite being really good at her job, she's never achieved promotion, whilst her male counterparts who perhaps don't work as hard or aren't as good as the job have been promoted over her. Okay, she discusses how that seems really, really unfair to her. Again, she's not really offered very much help by her interviewer, and not offered much good advice on how to progress because seemingly Louise is too old to go anywhere and to start to achieve real success in the workplace. What does this reveal about setbacks for women in the workplace? Pause the video and write down your thoughts. Okay, and then finally we have Shona. Shona lies about her age and her experience. She pretends that she's a bit older than she actually is, and she lies and says that she's much more experienced than she actually is. Shona's seemingly very young, which would position her in a better place than Louise, who was too old to be a top girl, and very enthusiastic and very motivated and driven. So I wonder, what is it that holds Shona back from being this top girl? And it seems to me like it's a lack of experience, but I always think this is a bit of a stickler in any kind of like job interview situation when people don't get a job because of experience, because how is a person supposed to get experience without being offered opportunity for experience? And she's not offered opportunity for experience by her employer. Instead, she's almost basically just told to go away. Okay, which leads me on to our final thinking point. So if Shona is too young, if Louise is too old, and if Janine is too attached to a person, what does it actually take to become a top girl? Can you write down what you think makes a woman capable of becoming a top girl? What sort of woman do you think these interviewers would actually help? And then I want you to have a think about, given what we've learnt about Act 2, do you think feminism provides opportunity for all women? To answer that question, you'll need to just reflect back on the knowledge that we have of Churchill, that she didn't want to be labelled as a feminist, and that she wanted to raise questions about whether this new wave of feminism was liberating or limiting for some women. So I'd like you to answer, and I'd like a detailed answer for this with evidence from the text. Does feminism provide opportunities for all women? I'd like you to submit your work through Show My Homework or via email. Any questions that you have, you can also email to me. Okay, well done, and I'll see you in tomorrow's live feedback session.